Reality TV turns strangers into overnight stars, but for some, the spotlight didn't just amplify their fame, it exposed dangerous secrets. Beneath the staged drama and glossy edits were hidden scams, tax schemes, harmful betrayals, and crimes no producer signed up for. Which faces were living double lives? Which lies finally unraveled? And how did their carefully curated images collapse so spectacularly? Brace yourself for the untold stories behind the once-beloved personalities who traded red carpets for courtrooms and confinement. 15. Todd Chrisley. Todd Chrisley rose to fame as the stylish, quick-witted patriarch at the center of Chrisley Knows Best, the reality television series that showcased a glamorous Southern family and a man who always seemed to have everything under control. Behind the designer labels and opulent homes, though, prosecutors later said, lay a very different story. An elaborate paper trail of forged bank records and embellished financial statements created to win lenders' trust. Federal investigators allege he used those manufactured documents to secure millions in loans by pretending to possess assets and income he did not actually have, then tapped that money to sustain a high-flying lifestyle of luxury cars, sprawling properties, and expensive tastes. Even after television success began to bring in real cash, filings submitted by prosecutors claim he continued to conceal income, routing earnings through accounts set up in other family members' names to limit IRS scrutiny and shield funds from creditors. The scheme began to unravel when a former associate provided the FBI with emails, spreadsheets, and hard drives that prosecutors say showed years of deceit. At trial, evidence and testimony painted the picture of a reality star who treated financial deception as routine business practice, and a federal jury convicted him on charges including bank scandal, wire scandal, conspiracy, and tax evasion. Sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, he went from one of reality television's most flamboyant figures to a cautionary example of how a carefully curated image can collapse when the paperwork is exposed. 14. Shah. Shah arrived on the reality television scene as a whirlwind of glamour, drama, and unapologetic extravagance. On the Salt Lake City chapter of a well-known Housewives franchise, she became synonymous with designer labels, emotional fireworks, and a close-knit entourage billed as the Shah Squad. To viewers, she seemed to inhabit effortless luxury, a large home, lavish gatherings, and a lifestyle presented as built on confidence and success. But from early on, fellow cast members and fans asked the same question: how was she funding this life? Prosecutors say the answer was far less glamorous than her on-screen persona. Investigators described a years-long telemarketing scheme that preyed on elderly and vulnerable people across the country, selling online business courses, website services, and financial coaching that prosecutors allege had little real value. Victims who believed they were investing in new opportunities instead lost savings, retirement money, and financial stability. Authorities say Shah played a managerial role in maintaining lead lists, directing parts of the sales apparatus, and sharing in the profits drawn from those who trusted the promises. The saga reached a dramatic peak when federal agents moved in while production was underway. Shah received a phone call, detached her microphone, and left the set shortly before agents converged, producing one of the most shocking scenes ever filmed in the genre. She was taken into custody later that day. Even after the arrest, she continued to appear on camera, vehemently denying wrongdoing, insisting she was being unfairly targeted, and expressing emotional outrage. Those public declarations stood against mounting evidence gathered by investigators, including financial documents, cooperation from former insiders, and communication records linked to the scheme. Her legal position eroded as a close aide, entered a guilty plea, and agreed to cooperate. And Shah ultimately acknowledged her role in a conspiracy to commit wire scandal in federal court. At sentencing, the judge stressed the real-world harm inflicted on victims and Shah's leadership in the operation, delivering a punishment that underscored the stark collapse of the glamorous image she had cultivated for television. 13. Teresa Giudice. She rose to fame as a central figure on The Real Housewives of New Jersey, known for a flashy wardrobe, lavish parties, and a personality that dominated the screen. The image of endless luxury, the big house, the designer clothes, the extravagant lifestyle became inseparable from her public persona. Behind that facade, however, investigators later uncovered a very different reality. A household under intense financial pressure, propped up with falsified paperwork and hidden income in an effort to maintain the illusion of wealth. Court documents alleged that she and her then-husband used inflated bank records, fake pay stubs, and false financial statements to obtain substantial loans. Some submissions falsely portrayed her as earning a high salary in real estate despite having no such job, helping justify the purchase and renovation of their sprawling home and the costly trappings viewers equated with her life on television. The matter escalated when the couple filed for bankruptcy. Because bankruptcy requires full disclosure under oath, prosecutors say key income sources were omitted, including payments from the television series, magazine pieces, cookbook royalties, and valuable personal belongings. A bankruptcy trustee noticed the glaring mismatch between the televised lifestyle and the bankruptcy claims, prompting a deeper federal probe. That investigation revealed a pattern of misrepresentation. As evidence mounted, she ultimately entered guilty pleas to scandal-related charges. At sentencing, the judge criticized the failure to disclose assets and the lack of transparency throughout the legal process. With young daughters in the household, the court fashioned the penalties so that a parent would remain at home to care for them. She reported to a federal correctional facility and served her term away from the cameras and the Bravo gloss that had helped build her brand. Her imprisonment surprised fans who had watched her climb from a suburban life to national celebrity. After her release, she returned to the show, rebuilt aspects of her career, and incorporated the ordeal into her public story, turning a dramatic fall and recovery into another chapter of her well-known narrative. 12. Mike Sorrentino. Mike Sorrentino rose to prominence as one of the defining personalities of early reality television. On Jersey Shore, he was the loud, confident, endlessly energetic center of attention, famous for his catchphrases and his gym, tan, laundry routine. That persona made him a sought-after name for endorsements, nightclub appearances, and television work, bringing him huge earnings at the height of his fame. But behind the on-screen bravado, federal investigators began uncovering a very different side of his finances. Court filings later showed that his career had brought in well over $8 million. Much of that income came from appearance fees, sponsorships, and media deals. Prosecutors alleged that he and his brother set up a cluster of small companies to handle those earnings, and that the businesses were used to conceal income and evade tax obligations. Investigators reported numerous cash payments and bank deposits deliberately kept below the $10,000 reporting threshold, a pattern that suggested an intent to avoid scrutiny. Authorities also said that a number of personal luxury purchases, designer clothing, expensive vehicles, and lavish trips were improperly written off as business expenses, shrinking his declared income on paper. As auditors pieced together bank records, contracts, and receipts, the financial picture painted by his tax returns no longer matched the lifestyle he displayed in public. Faced with mounting evidence, he ultimately admitted guilt to tax-related charges. His sentencing marked a striking fall from the nightlife and television spotlight to a term in federal custody, a shift that underscored the real consequences of financial misconduct. Sorrentino's story did not end with incarceration. Before serving his sentence, he acknowledged mistakes, entered recovery, and committed to rebuilding. While behind bars, he stayed focused on work and sobriety, using the time to address personal issues and prepare for a fresh start. When he completed his sentence and returned to the public eye, he did so in a very different role than the party persona that made him famous. He presented himself as calmer and more reflective, emphasizing health and responsibility. His journey from celebrity to conviction, and then to recovery, stands out among reality television scandals, a reminder that public downfall can be followed by personal rehabilitation. 11. Joe Exotic. Joe Exotic rocketed to global notoriety after the documentary that brought his world of big cats and loud personality into millions of homes. With bleached hair, bedazzled jackets, and a showman's bravado, he looked like a larger Rutherford-life character who existed beyond ordinary rules. He framed himself as an entertainer who cherished big cats and battled rivals and conspiracies, but official records and investigative reporting soon painted a far darker picture. Behind the spectacle, authorities discovered a pattern of illegal conduct that went well past eccentricity. Court documents describe a private zoo that turned tiger cubs into a major attraction. Intimate encounters drew visitors and paid the bills, yet when the animals matured, the costs of keeping them rose dramatically. Prosecutors alleged that paperwork was falsified, animals were moved improperly between facilities, and wildlife protections were repeatedly flouted. Disturbing testimony also claimed that healthy animals were killed to make space for new cubs, a claim that alarmed viewers and conservationists alike. A bitter feud with the owner of a nearby sanctuary intensified his legal woes. After losing a trademark dispute, he is accused of shifting property and money into associates' names in what investigators viewed as an attempt to hide assets from the courts. That alleged scheme added a layer of financial misconduct to the unfolding case. Most chilling were the revelations of a murder roofer-hire plot targeting his rival. Investigators documented two separate attempts. One allegedly involved paying a zoo worker to travel south and carry out an attack. The other centered on negotiations with a man believed to be a hitman, who was in fact working with federal agents. Taped conversations, exchanged cash, and explicit instructions convinced prosecutors these were concrete plans, not idle threats. When the wildlife violations, financial maneuvers, and murder roof-hire evidence were combined, the prosecution's case became overwhelming. The trial exposed a figure consumed by desperation, paranoia, and a craving for attention that eclipsed ethics. He was ultimately convicted and given a lengthy federal sentence, making his fall from fame one of the most extreme collapses in reality television. 10. Billy McFarland. He did not rise to fame as a typical reality star. Instead, he engineered a spectacle so grand and deceitful that it became the subject of documentaries and turned him into a household name for scandal. He pitched himself as a wonderkind, a tech visionary who could craft ultra-exclusive experiences for the wealthy. Behind glossy ads and influencer endorsements, however, lay a steady pattern of lies and financial manipulation that would land him behind bars. The scheme centered on a promised luxury music festival on a private Bahamian island, sold through immaculate social campaigns that showed models on white sand, private jets, and lavish villas. What those images hid was that the festival was largely a fantasy. Court filings later revealed falsified financial records, forged documents, and sham confirmations used to convince investors and partners that the venture was bankable. Instead of building necessary infrastructure, funds were funneled into promotion, celebrity deals, and a lavish lifestyle. As the event date neared, vendors warned that there was no adequate housing, power, or sanitation, but ticket sales continued. When attendees finally arrived, they found soggy disaster tents, paltry food, no scheduled performers, and conditions more akin to an emergency relief site than a luxury getaway. The unraveling played out in real time across social media, exposing the deception to a global audience. Federal investigators traced the fraudulent paper trail and alleged that millions were lost by investors. Arrests followed, and prosecutors pointed to a pattern of repeated dishonesty, including attempts to sell access to exclusive events even after his initial charges. Facing overwhelming evidence, he admitted guilt in court, where the judge condemned his manipulation and the harm inflicted on those who had trusted him. His downfall is a stark illustration of influence without accountability, a carefully curated image sold as reality until the illusion shattered and the consequences caught up with him. 9. Mike Hassini. Mike Hassini arrived in British structured reality television as the impeccably groomed newcomer on The Only Way is Essex, the kind of polished figure who seemed to embody effortless success. He presented the trappings the format demanded: sculpted looks, designer labels, luxury cars, and the aura of someone who had it all. To viewers, he was the glossy centerpiece of a world built on glamour and status, but investigators later uncovered a much darker truth behind that carefully curated facade. Court documents describe a group of fraudsters running a pair of bogus investment schemes that promised rare diamonds and unusually high returns. Their targets were largely older people who were convinced they were placing lifelong savings into supposedly safe assets. In reality, the gems were worthless, the financial products fictitious, and the money sent in by victims was siphoned away by the conspirators. Prosecutors say Hassini played a central role in turning those stolen funds into seemingly legitimate cash. He and associates set up shell companies that looked credible on paper, and his public profile was used to lend further legitimacy. Funds moved through accounts tied to those businesses, passed through layers of transactions, and were returned to the ring as laundered proceeds. He did not have to meet victims face to face. His job, according to investigators, was to make ill-gotten gains appear clean and distant from the original crimes. The ensuing inquiry was thorough. Police followed the money trail from the fake firms to accounts associated with Hassini, and a web of emails, banking records, and internal messages outlined a clear pattern of laundering. Faced with the evidence, he initially denied any knowledge of the scandal, but investigators and prosecutors argued the paper trail spoke for itself. In court, the judge highlighted the severe impact on elderly victims who lost life savings and security. Far from shielding him, his celebrity amplified the cruelty of the scheme. A public persona used to hide exploitation rather than to inspire. Hassini's fall from glossy TV figure to convicted participant is a stark example of how maintaining a lavish image can push reality personalities beyond moral bounds, and a reminder that the manufactured world of structured reality can mask very real harm. 8. Nida. He arrived on The Real Housewives of Atlanta as the affable, athletic spouse of a high-profile attorney, projecting calm confidence and an effortlessly magnetic charm. On screen, he seemed like a supportive partner in a world of luxury cars, designer wardrobes, and the glossy lifestyle the series celebrates. Behind that composed public face, however, investigators would later expose a long-running controversial enterprise built on stolen identities, sham businesses, and a complex network designed to siphon money from institutions and ordinary people. Court documents allege he and collaborators harvested personal data from unsuspecting victims, then used those identities to create a series of shell companies with authoritative-sounding names meant to pass bank and government scrutiny. Those paper firms served as perfect fronts to receive fraudulent deposits. Once accounts were established, the group reportedly filed fabricated tax claims in the names of the identity theft victims and steered the refunds into accounts controlled by him. The scheme extended beyond false refunds. Stolen government checks and retirement payments were allegedly funneled through his corporate web, and auto loan scandal featured prominently in his playbook. By obtaining vehicle identification details from cars on dealership lots, the operation used pilfered identities to apply for loans on vehicles that were never purchased. Lenders thought they were financing legitimate sales, while the proceeds were diverted as soon as the funds were released. What made the revelations particularly jarring was that the activity persisted while he maintained a television presence. Audiences saw family interactions and social maneuvering even as investigators traced transactions through layered accounts and interviewed people tied to the scheme. Ultimately, a close associate cooperated with prosecutors and helped lay bare the full scope of the operation. When he answered to the court, the judge noted prior convictions and emphasized that he had earlier opportunities to rebuild his life within the law. Instead, prosecutors say, he returned to the same illegal patterns on a larger scale. His reality TV notoriety did not protect him. If anything, it sharpened the contrast between the polished public image and the controversial conduct happening off-camera. His fall from grace stands as one of reality television's more stark, cautionary tales, a reminder that celebrity cannot erase accountability, and that a glamorous persona cannot conceal the consequences of deception. 7. Richard Hatch. Richard Hatch rose to fame as the divisive victor of a pioneering island survival show, captivating viewers with his alliance-building, bold scheming, and unpredictable persona. His brash confidence and occasional habit of roaming the camp without clothes made him an unforgettable figure in the early days of unscripted television. When he accepted the winner's prize on stage, he seemed untouchable, an archetypal strategist who had outplayed everyone else. The drama, however, moved off-camera. Federal authorities later alleged that Hatch returned home and failed to report the prize money on his tax returns. That omission was not an isolated lapse but part of a recurring pattern spanning multiple filing periods, prosecutors claimed. While the public watched him bask in victory, tax officials say his returns ignored substantial earnings and were repeatedly amended in ways that understated income and overstated deductions. Investigators also examined income from radio spots, paid appearances, and fundraising work linked to a youth program he helped launch. Their review suggested many of those payments were underreported or not reported at all, and that donations intended for the charity were sometimes routed into accounts that benefited him personally. The financial record painted a picture of someone treating ordinary tax obligations as optional. At trial, Hatch alternately defended himself and argued the discrepancies were misunderstandings rather than deliberate scandal. Prosecutors countered with bank records, contracts, and witness testimony showing a consistent failure to disclose significant payments. The jury saw a familiar paradox: a man celebrated for tactical brilliance in a televised game who had not applied the same meticulousness to his legal responsibilities. The judge underscored that tax laws apply equally, celebrity notwithstanding, and Hatch was sentenced under federal law and served time. His conviction became one of the most talked-about falls from grace in the modern reality television era. Hatch's story endures as a cautionary tale about sudden fame and misplaced confidence. The strategist who outmaneuvered his rivals could not outmaneuver the paper trail, and the repercussions followed him long after his televised victory. 6. Abby Lee Miller. Abby Lee Miller rose to prominence as a domineering presence on reality television, famed for her strict discipline and uncompromising demands for flawless performance. As the hard-nosed instructor on a popular dance program, she cultivated a public image of toughness, precision, and relentless pursuit of victory. Millions came to know her sharp critiques and commanding demeanor, seeing her as the driving force behind aspiring young performers. Behind the scenes, however, federal investigators would later uncover a very different picture, one of concealed income and deceptive financial moves that clashed with the persona she projected. Before her television fame, Abby faced serious financial strain and entered a bankruptcy process meant to provide an honest path to reorganize debts. That process requires full disclosure, yet prosecutors say that as her media profile and earnings grew, she failed to report substantial new income to the court. According to the indictment, payments tied to television work, branded merchandise, speaking engagements, and overseas teaching were diverted into accounts and arrangements not disclosed to the bankruptcy trustee. Investigators describe a pattern in which funds were moved through associates and redirected to hide the true extent of her revenue. The discrepancy became impossible to ignore when the judge overseeing her case encountered a televised promotional montage showcasing Abby as the star of a major dance competition. The image of a supposedly struggling studio owner fronting a high-profile production prompted deeper scrutiny and formal inquiries into her financial statements. As investigators traced bank transfers and international payments, the alleged concealment took on the appearance of deliberate evasion rather than bookkeeping error. Hidden accounts and undisclosed earnings emerged as repeated themes in their findings. Confronted with documentary evidence, Abby acknowledged lapses in her legal obligations and admitted to not meeting the duties required by the bankruptcy court. At sentencing, the court noted the stark irony of a public disciplinarian who privately failed to follow federal rules meant to ensure transparency. She was ordered to serve time in a correctional facility, bringing a sudden halt to the chapter of her life defined by fierce competitiveness and public authority. Abby Lee Miller's fall from television prominence underscores a classic tension between image and reality, and a cautionary tale about the consequences of trying to hide what the law requires to be revealed. 5. Joe Francis. Joe Francis rose to fame by turning shock into profit. As the founder of a notorious video series that celebrated spring break antics and pushed the envelope of taste, he became emblematic of a certain era of reality entertainment excess. His image was built on displays of wealth, a rebellious persona, and a confidence that often seemed untouchable. Yet as his business flourished, his private life grew increasingly entangled with legal troubles that eventually culminated in a prison sentence and the unraveling of that carefree facade. Court records describe a key episode that accelerated his downfall: a harmful confrontation outside a nightclub. Witness accounts, police documentation, and testimony at trial recounted a physical altercation involving two women who later accused him of assault and unlawful restraint. Prosecutors depicted a man who used his celebrity and influence to intimidate others, behaving as if the ordinary rules did not apply to him. His lawyers contested parts of the narrative, but the case proceeded, and a judge ultimately found against him, handing down a jail term that attracted widespread media attention. That episode was not isolated. Over time, Francis faced a string of legal disputes tied to tax issues, harassment claims, and various business conflicts. Each matter added to a public storyline that framed him as someone repeatedly skirting the line between bold publicity stunts and unlawful conduct. Still, the nightclub confrontation marked a turning point. The trouble shifted from corporate and civil battles into a controversial conviction grounded in alleged personal misconduct rather than merely commercial disputes. At sentencing, the court emphasized documented patterns of aggressive behavior cited in prior filings, underscoring that fame and fortune do not confer immunity. He served his sentence in a local correctional facility, a stark contrast to the glamorous lifestyle he once flaunted. His release did little to restore his standing. Continued legal entanglements, relentless criticism, and lingering controversies kept his name tied to conflict, reinforcing the image of a once dominant media figure undone by choices that crossed legal lines. Francis's trajectory illustrates the risks of building a career on provocation. The same instincts that drove his commercial success ultimately contributed to a downfall in which notoriety could not shield him from accountability. 4. Charles Cosby. Charles Cosby rose to public attention not through a glossy reality franchise, but through a true controversy narrative that traced his ties to a notorious drug queenpin. His on-screen presence was striking, charismatic, candid, and unafraid to discuss the choices that had brought him into the spotlight. That same frankness, though, blurred the line between televisual fame and real-world danger, and choices that made him compelling on camera also helped drag him toward controversial exposure. Federal filings show that his relationship with a high-profile incarcerated cartel leader began as correspondence that evolved into something far deeper. What started like an admiring exchange grew into a romantic and business entanglement that embedded him within a controversial enterprise. Prosecutors later described his role in distribution schemes connected to that operation, a world where fast money and high risk came with an unmistakable edge. As law enforcement dismantled pieces of the organization, efforts to distance himself did not go unnoticed. Intercepted messages, testimony from cooperating witnesses, and materials seized during raids tied him to the network. Agents were able to map transactions and reconstruct meetings recounted in court, and prosecutors argued the evidence showed active participation rather than mere proximity. His visibility on camera, far from shielding him, only amplified attention from investigators. In court, Cosby framed himself as someone overwhelmed by the influence of a powerful figure, caught up in forces beyond his control. Yet the documentary trail and the records presented by the government depicted a person who accepted both the profits and the notoriety of his involvement. The judge stressed that being close to danger is not a defense for taking part in it, and that public exposure can make culpability harder to deny. After serving his time, he sought to rebuild, but the public memory of his dramatic ascent and fall remained intertwined with the story told on screen, a cautionary example of how allure and notoriety can quickly become consequences. 3. Jeremy Jackson. Jeremy Jackson arrived in the unscripted world already recognizable from his early work on a popular lifeguard drama, a background that made him an instant draw on celebrity-focused competition shows. His charisma and volatile presence translated well to television, but off-camera, his life was increasingly marked by personal struggles and harmful episodes. Court documents linked his substance problems to a string of disturbing encounters. Police reports described moments of paranoia, aggression, and reckless conduct. The most serious episode unfolded in a residential area when a dispute escalated and a woman was left seriously hurt after he used a small blade in the altercation. Jackson initially framed the episode as self-defense, blaming fear and intoxication for his actions, but investigators found inconsistencies between his account and the physical evidence. Surveillance clips, medical records, and witness statements formed a picture prosecutors argued was more consistent with intentional harm than with a panicked reaction. His past stardom did little to mitigate the court's view of the danger posed by the combination of substance misuse and unchecked impulses. He accepted responsibility, entered a plea, and received a custodial sentence. While confined, he pursued treatment, acknowledged the damage his behavior caused, and worked to confront the issues that led to his downfall. His story remains a stark reminder that celebrity cannot shield someone from the consequences of unresolved personal struggles. 2. Josh Duggar. He first came to public attention through a family reality program that marketed a carefully curated image of tradition, faith, and wholesome family life. To many fans, he embodied stability and strict moral standards. Investigations that followed, however, revealed behavior that directly contradicted that persona, and his arrest and subsequent conviction became among the most talked-about scandals in the history of reality television. Federal investigators say their probe began after a referral about illicit material found on a work computer. Forensic analysts examined recovered files, system logs, and internet records, assembling a timeline they described as intentional and methodical. The technical evidence, including data remnants, metadata links, and access records, was presented as tying the activity to him. He initially denied wrongdoing in early proceedings, but expert testimony described the digital trail in detail, showing the steps taken to obtain, view, and conceal the material. Jurors were shown extensive technical documentation, and their decision returned a guilty verdict. At sentencing, the judge emphasized the real harm to the victims depicted and the years of concealed conduct that preceded the investigation. The sentence reflected both the seriousness of the offenses and the breach of trust by someone who had positioned himself as a moral authority. He was sent to a federal facility and is now separated from the public life that once celebrated his family's strict image. His fall remains one of the most devastating in the genre. A prominent television figure whose projected virtues masked some of the gravest offenses uncovered in reality television. 1. Alexis Neiers. She first came to public attention on a Hollywood reality series that followed young women chasing fashion, nightlife, and fame. On camera, she seemed caught between ambition and chaos, a teenager swept up in a world of parties, cameras, and celebrity fixation. Behind the scenes, however, investigators were probing a series of thefts, later dubbed by the press the Bling Ring. Court documents tied her to a circle of peers who targeted the homes of well-known entertainers. Prosecutors portrayed the thefts as planned operations that relied on social media, public schedules, and interior photos to choose and enter residences. Stolen items included designer clothes, jewelry, handbags, and accessories, the very tokens of the celebrity lifestyle the group coveted. When arrests began, she initially downplayed her role, but material found in nearby residences and statements from other members placed her in the events. Her television image complicated public reaction, with filmed scenes of carefree nights clashing with the gravity of the allegations. The prosecution argued the motive was fascination with glamour rather than any urgent need. In court, she expressed regret, acknowledging that fame and peer pressure had warped her judgment. The judge emphasized responsibility, the violation of private spaces, and the impact on victims. She served time in a local facility and, after release, worked to separate herself from that chapter, speaking about growth and the corrosive pressures of youth culture in Los Angeles. Her story remains a stark example of how the pursuit of glamour can end in harsh reality. Lights that once promised forever can cast the longest shadows. Behind every glittering entrance and staged confession, there are unguarded moments, quiet regrets, and choices that outlast applause. Fame illuminates, but it also magnifies the pressure to perform, the hunger for attention, the belief in one's own immunity, and those forces can steer even the most familiar faces toward places no camera can fully justify. These are not merely tales of scandal, they are human stories of risk, accountability, and consequence. Editing can polish an image, but it cannot erase what happens when the cameras stop rolling. If you want more untold chapters from behind the curtain, follow the channel, join the community, and stay with us as we return to the shadows and shine light on the hidden truths behind the spectacle.